Elena Martinez wiped the marble countertop for the third time that morning, her movements precise and silent. In the massive kitchen of the Rossetti mansion, she had learned to become invisible. The golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the polished floor. But Elena remained in the darker corners. Just as she had been taught, she had been working for the Rossetti family for 8 months now. 8 months of cleaning blood from expensive suits, pretending not to hear the screaming from the basement, and keeping her eyes down whenever the men in dark suits walked through the halls. The pay was exceptional, but Elena knew the price of asking questions or seeing too much. The kitchen door swung open, and Elena quickly stepped behind the large refrigerator. Heavy footsteps echoed across the floor, followed by the familiar voice of Marco Rossetti, the eldest son and heir to the family empire. He was speaking in rapid Italian to someone on his phone, his voice tense and angry. Elena held her breath, clutching her cleaning cloth tightly. She had seen Marco many times, but always from a distance. He was tall and imposing, with dark hair that was always perfectly styled and suits that cost more than most people made in a year. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. People whispered about his temper, his ruthlessness, and the way he handled family business. The conversation ended abruptly, and Elena heard the sharp sound of a phone being slammed onto the counter. She waited, counting her heartbeats, hoping he would leave soon. But instead, she heard the refrigerator door open. Just inches from where she was hiding, Marco's hand reached around the corner, nearly touching her shoulder as he grabbed a bottle of water. Elena pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself smaller, but it was too late. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marco's dark brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made Elena feel exposed, as if he could see right through her carefully constructed invisibility. She expected anger, or perhaps the cold dismissal she had witnessed him give to others who had accidentally crossed his path. Instead, something unexpected flickered across his face. Surprise? Maybe even curiosity? Elena quickly lowered her gaze, remembering the first rule Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, had drilled into her: never make eye contact with family members. "What's your name?" Marco's voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Lacking the hard edge she associated with his phone conversations, Elena's throat felt dry. Speaking to family members without being spoken to first was another forbidden rule, but he had asked her a direct question. "Elena, sir. Elena Martinez. How long have you been working here, Elena?" She risked a quick glance up before looking down again. 8 months, sir." Marco leaned against the counter, making no move to leave. This was dangerous territory. Elena had heard stories about maids who had gotten too comfortable, who had forgotten their place. They disappeared quietly, and new staff were hired within days. 8 months, and I've never noticed you before," he said, almost to himself. "You're very good at being invisible." Elena didn't know how to respond to that. Was it a compliment or a warning? She remained silent, hoping he would dismiss her and she could return to her work, but Marco seemed in no hurry to leave. He opened the water bottle and took a slow drink, his eyes never leaving her face. Elena could feel the heat rising in her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. She had always been plain, unremarkable. Her mother used to say she had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. It had been an asset in this job, but now it felt like a disadvantage. "You clean my office?" Marco said suddenly. It wasn't a question, but Elena nodded anyway. She did clean his office, usually early in the morning when he wasn't there. She had memorized every detail of that room during her careful cleanings. The heavy wooden desk, the expensive whiskey collection, the family photos that showed a different side of the dangerous man standing before her. "You're thorough," he continued. "Everything is always exactly as I left it, but cleaner." Elena had taken pride in that. She had developed a system for cleaning around his personal items without disturbing them. She even remembered which papers were stacked in which order on his desk. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. The kitchen fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. This conversation had already lasted too long. Someone would notice soon, and questions would be asked. As if reading her thoughts. Marco straightened up and adjusted his suit jacket. You should get back to work, he said, but his tone wasn't dismissive. It was almost protective. As if he was reminding her to maintain her cover, Elena nodded quickly and moved toward the door, eager to escape. But as she reached for the handle, Marco's voice stopped her. Elena, she turned back, her hand still on the door handle. Be careful who you trust in this house, he said quietly. Not everyone here has your best interests at heart. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving through the other entrance to the kitchen. Elena stood alone, her mind racing with questions. Why had he warned her? What did he know that she didn't? And most importantly, why had he taken the time to notice her at all? She returned to her cleaning with shaking hands, trying to process what had just happened. In 8 months, she had successfully avoided any meaningful contact with the family. She had been the perfect invisible maid, exactly what the job required. But now Marco Rossetti knew her name. He had looked at her, really looked at her, and something had changed. Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed invisibility had just been shattered, and she had no idea what the consequences might be. As she worked, she replayed every word of their conversation, searching for hidden meanings. The warning echoed in her mind. In a house full of dangerous people, who exactly was she supposed to be careful of? And why had the most dangerous person in the house taken the time to warn her at all? The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks, but Elena couldn't concentrate. She found herself jumping at every sound, looking over her shoulder constantly. The invisible maid had been seen, and there was no going back to the safety of being overlooked. That night, as she walked to her small apartment above the garage, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She just didn't know if it would be for better or worse. The next morning brought an unexpected change to Elena's routine. Instead of her usual early shift, Mrs. Patterson called her into the main office before dawn. The head housekeeper was a stern woman in her 50s who ran the household staff with military precision. She had never summoned Elena for a private meeting before. Elena knocked softly on the door and waited for permission to enter. Mrs. Patterson sat behind her desk, studying a clipboard with Elena's work records. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Your work has been satisfactory, Mrs. Patterson said finally, not looking up from the papers. Mr. Rossetti has requested that you be assigned to additional duties. Elena's stomach dropped. Additional duties usually meant one of two things. Either she was being promoted to handle more sensitive areas of the house, or she was being tested before being quietly dismissed. Neither option felt safe. What kind of additional duties, ma'am? Mrs. Patterson finally looked up, her gray eyes studying Elena with the same intensity Marco had shown the day before. You'll be cleaning the private family wing. This includes Mr. Marco's personal quarters, his private study, and the adjacent guest rooms. The private family wing was off-limits to most staff. Only the most trusted employees were allowed access, and even then, only during specific hours. Elena had never set foot beyond the main living areas. This is a significant promotion, Mrs. Patterson continued. It comes with a substantial pay increase, but also with additional responsibilities and expectations. You'll be working alone in those areas. No other staff will be present. Elena nodded, trying to process this information. Working alone meant no witnesses to whatever she might see or hear. It was either a sign of great trust or a very dangerous position to be in. There are new rules you must follow, Mrs. Patterson said, sliding a typed sheet of paper across the desk. Read this carefully and sign at the bottom. Elena picked up the paper and scanned the contents. The rules were more detailed and specific than her original contract. She was forbidden from discussing anything she saw or heard while working in the private wing. She was not to touch any personal items unless specifically instructed to clean them. She was to work during designated hours only and was required to announce her presence upon entering each room, most importantly. She was never to enter any room if it was occupied. These rules are for your own protection, Mrs. Patterson said as Elena signed her name. The family values their privacy above all else. Discretion isn't just expected, it's a matter of survival. The word survival hung in the air between them. Elena understood the message clearly. An hour later, Elena stood outside the ornate doors leading to the private family wing. Her hands trembled slightly as she used the special key Mrs. Patterson had given her. The hallway beyond was different from the rest of the house. While the main areas were grand and imposing, designed to impress visitors, this wing felt more personal and lived in. Family photos lined the walls, showing the Rossetti family through the years. Elena recognized a younger Marco in several of them, often standing beside an older man who shared his strong jawline and intense eyes, his father. The head of the family. She started with the guest rooms, working efficiently and quietly. These rooms were rarely used but maintained in perfect condition. As she dusted and polished, Elena found herself listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate someone was approaching. By noon, she had worked her way to Marco's personal study. Elena knocked softly 3 times as instructed and waited for a response. Hearing nothing, she entered cautiously. The study was larger than his office downstairs and infinitely more personal. Books lined every wall, not just for show but clearly well read. A comfortable leather chair sat beside a window overlooking the garden. Personal items were scattered around: a half-finished chess game, reading glasses on an open book, a coffee cup with a faint ring stain on a wooden side table. Elena began dusting carefully, maintaining her rule of not disturbing the placement of anything personal. She was reaching to clean a high bookshelf when she heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped directly outside the study door. Elena froze, her cloth still extended toward the shelf. According to the rules, she should call out and identify herself, but her voice seemed to have disappeared. The doorknob turned slowly. Marco entered the room and stopped when he saw her. He was dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, dark jeans and a simple white shirt that somehow made him look younger and more approachable. "Elena," he said, and she was surprised to hear what sounded like pleasure in his voice. "I'm sorry, sir." I knocked but heard no response. "I can come back later," Elena said quickly, lowering her cleaning supplies. "No need," Marco said, closing the door behind him. "Continue with your work." But instead of leaving, he walked to his desk and sat down, effectively trapping Elena in the room with him. She had never been alone with any family member before, and certainly not in such an intimate setting. Elena tried to continue cleaning, but she was hyper-aware of Marco's presence. She could feel him watching her as she worked, and it made her movements awkward and self-conscious. "You read?" Marco said suddenly. Elena paused in her dusting. "Sir? Yesterday, when you were cleaning my office? You were careful not to disturb the bookmark in the novel I was reading. Most people wouldn't have noticed or cared about something so small." Elena wasn't sure if this was a test or genuine observation. "I try to respect personal belongings, sir." Marco leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same intense gaze from the day before. "What do you like to read?" The question caught Elena off guard. No one in the house had ever asked about her personal interests. She was supposed to be invisible, without personal preferences or opinions. I enjoy classic literature, sir. When I have time." "Which classics?" Elena hesitated. This conversation felt dangerous, like stepping into quicksand. But Marco seemed genuinely interested in her answer. "Jane Eyre is my favorite. I also enjoy Dickens and the Brontë sisters." Something shifted in Marco's expression. "Jane Eyre," he repeated thoughtfully. "The story of a plain, invisible woman who captures the attention of a powerful, dangerous man." The parallel wasn't lost on Elena, and the way Marco said it made her cheeks burn. She focused intently on her dusting, trying to ignore the implication in his words. "You see the irony, don't you?" Marco continued. "Here you are, trying so hard to be invisible, to go unnoticed. But the harder you try to disappear, the more you stand out." Elena's hand stilled on the bookshelf. "I don't understand, sir." Marco stood and walked closer to where she was working. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her thoughts scatter. In a house full of people trying to be seen, trying to impress or intimidate, you're the only one who actively tries to disappear. It makes you the most interesting person here. Elena finally looked at him directly, forgetting the rule about eye contact. Sir, I'm just here to do my job. Are you? Marco asked quietly. Or are you hiding from something? The question hit too close to home. Elena was hiding from her past, from the reason she had needed this job so desperately, from the people she had left behind. But she couldn't tell him that. I should finish my work, she said, turning back to the bookshelf. Marco didn't push further, but he also didn't leave. He returned to his desk and began working on some papers, creating an atmosphere of strange domestic intimacy. Elena found herself relaxing slightly as she worked, stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. She was wrong about him not looking. Every time she glanced his way, his dark eyes were already on her, watching with an intensity that made her heart race. By the time she finished cleaning the study, Elena felt like she had run a marathon. Same time tomorrow? Marco asked as she gathered her supplies. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. As she reached the door, Marco spoke again. Elena? That warning I gave you yesterday, be extra careful around my cousin Vincent. He's been asking questions about the new staff. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen Vincent Rossetti around the house. He was younger than Marco, flashier, with a cruel smile that never reached his eyes. The thought of him asking questions about her was terrifying. Thank you for the warning, sir. As Elena left the study, she realized that her invisibility was definitely compromised. Marco Rossetti was not only noticing her, he was actively seeking her out. And in a world where the wrong kind of attention could be deadly, she wasn't sure if his interest was her salvation or her doom. Elena's routine in the private wing quickly developed into something that felt dangerously comfortable. Every morning at 10, she would clean Marco's study while he worked at his desk. They rarely spoke directly, but there was an awareness between them that grew stronger each day. She learned his habits without meaning to. He always drank his coffee black and finished exactly 2 cups before noon. He preferred classical music playing softly in the background while he worked. When he was frustrated, he would run his hands through his hair and pace by the window. When he was deep in thought, he would tap his pen against his desk in a rhythmic pattern. Elena found herself looking forward to these quiet hours more than she should. There was something peaceful about working in the same space as Marco, something that felt almost normal despite the dangerous world they lived in. But the illusion of normalcy shattered on a Wednesday morning when Elena arrived to find the study door already open. Voices carried from inside. Marco's familiar tone and another voice she recognized with a growing sense of dread. Vincent. Rossetti was sitting across from Marco's desk, his expensive suit perfectly tailored and his blonde hair slicked back. Elena had successfully avoided any direct interaction with Vincent since starting work in the private wing, but Mrs. Patterson's warnings about him echoed in her mind. Elena knocked softly on the doorframe, hoping to retreat and return later. Both men looked up at the sound. Ah, the famous Elena, Vincent said, his voice carrying a tone that made Elena's skin crawl. I've been hearing so much about you. Marco's expression darkened immediately. Elena, come back in an hour. But Vincent held up a hand, his smile widening. No, I'd like to meet our dedicated cleaning lady. Please come in. Elena glanced at Marco, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. But Vincent had already stood and was walking toward her, effectively blocking her exit. You know, it's funny, Vincent said, circling Elena slowly like a predator studying prey. I've been asking around about you, and it's the strangest thing. Nobody seems to know much about your background. Elena's heart pounded. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. I provided all necessary documentation when I was hired, sir. Oh yes, the documentation, Vincent laughed. Very thorough paperwork. Almost too thorough, if you know what I mean. Like someone took great care to make sure everything looked perfect. Marco stood from his desk, his voice carrying a warning. Vincent, what's your point? My point, cousin, is that I think our little maid here isn't quite what she seems. Vincent stopped directly in front of Elena, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded her of danger. Everyone has a past they'd rather keep private, Marco said evenly. That's not a crime. Vincent's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. Isn't it, though? In our business, secrets can be very dangerous things, especially when they belong to someone who has access to our private spaces. Elena felt trapped between the two men. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut, and she realized she was witnessing something much larger than just questions about her background. This was about power and territory between the cousins. Elena's work has been exemplary, Marco continued, moving to stand beside her. The gesture was subtle but protective, and Vincent noticed immediately. How interesting, Vincent said, his eyes narrowing. You seem quite invested in defending the help, Marco. That's not like you. The accusation hung in the air like a loaded gun. Elena understood now why Marco had warned her about Vincent. This wasn't just about her background. It was about Vincent using her to undermine Marco's position in the family. I defend all our employees when they're doing good work. Marco replied coolly. Vincent studied them both for a long moment. His calculating gaze moving back and forth between Elena and Marco. Elena could practically see the wheels turning in his mind. Well, Vincent said finally, I suppose time will tell what secrets eventually come to light. They always do, in our family. He moved toward the door, then paused. Elena, isn't it? Such a pretty name. I do hope we'll have more opportunities to chat. The threat in his words was unmistakable. After Vincent left, the study felt like a tomb. Elena stood frozen, realizing that she had just become a pawn in a dangerous game she didn't understand. He knows, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. Marco closed the door and turned to face her. Knows what? Elena hesitated. She had worked so hard to keep her past buried, but Vincent's questions made it clear that her secrets weren't as safe as she had hoped. And now Marco was asking directly. My name isn't really Elena Martinez, she said quietly, sinking into the chair across from Marco's desk. It's Elena Santos. I changed it when I moved here. Marco sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. Why? The story poured out of Elena like water through a broken dam. She told him about her life in Chicago, where she had worked as a bookkeeper for a small import business. How she had discovered that her boss was laundering money for a rival crime family? How she had been naive enough to think she could report it to the police without consequences. They killed my boss before the trial, Elena said, her voice hollow. Made it look like a robbery. Then they came after me. The prosecutor said I needed to disappear until they could build a case without my testimony. Marco listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, the silence stretched between them. So you've been in witness protection, Marco said finally. Elena shook her head. Not officially? The prosecutor said the case fell apart without the main evidence. He helped me get new documents and suggested I find work somewhere far from Chicago. Somewhere I could disappear completely. And you chose to work for a crime family, Marco said. And there was something that might have been amusement in his voice. Elena laughed bitterly. The irony isn't lost on me. But I needed work that paid well and asked few questions. Your family's reputation for valuing loyalty and discretion made it seem safe. Safe, Marco repeated thoughtfully. And now Vincent suspects something. Elena nodded miserably. He's going to keep digging until he finds out who I really am. And when he does, he'll try to use it against me, Marco finished. That's what this is really about. Vincent has been looking for leverage to challenge my position as heir. A scandal involving my personal staff could give him the opening he needs. Elena felt sick. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to disappear and live a quiet life. Marco leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. What was the name of the family you witnessed against? The Torinos. Why? Something dangerous flashed in Marco's eyes. The Torinos have been trying to move into our territory for years. If they're looking for you and Vincent finds out you're here... Elena didn't need him to finish the sentence. She would become not just a liability to Marco, but a potential weapon for his enemies. I should leave, Elena said, standing up abruptly. Tonight, before this gets any worse. Marco stood as well, moving around the desk to face her. Where will you go? Do you have money? New documents? Elena shook her head. She had used all her resources just to get to this point. Then running isn't an option, Marco said firmly. And besides, I won't let Vincent or anyone else hurt you. The determination in his voice surprised Elena. Why? Why would you risk everything for someone like me? Marco stepped closer, close enough that Elena could see the flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. Because someone like you is exactly what this world needs more of. Someone honest, someone who tries to do the right thing even when it's dangerous. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm not honest. I lied about who I am. You survived? Marco corrected gently. There's a difference. For a moment they stood facing each other in the quiet study, and Elena felt something shift between them. This wasn't just about protection anymore, or even about the dangerous game Vincent was playing. There was something deeper, something that scared Elena more than any threat from her past. Marco Rossetti was falling for the invisible Maid, and she was falling for him right back. In their world, that kind of feeling could be deadlier than any enemy. The weeks following Elena's confession to Marco were filled with a tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the mansion. Vincent's suspicions hadn't disappeared. If anything, his interest in Elena had intensified. He made a point of appearing wherever she was working, asking casual questions that felt anything but casual. Elena tried to return to her invisible routine, but it was impossible now. Marco had assigned one of his most trusted men, Tony, to keep a discreet watch over her movements. She could feel Vincent's eyes on her during family dinners when she served in the main dining room. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed more nervous around her, though she couldn't tell if the head housekeeper suspected something or was simply responding to the general atmosphere of tension. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Elena was finishing her duties in Marco's personal quarters. She was making his bed when she heard urgent voices in the hallway outside. Moving quietly to the door, she pressed her ear against the wood. Don single quotes Take care what your feelings are, a deep voice was saying. Elena recognized it as Don Roberto Rossetti, Marco's father and the head of the family. This situation with the maid has gone too far. Father. She's not a threat? Marco's voice was strained, more emotional than Elena had ever heard it. Vincent has evidence that she's hiding her identity. In our world, that makes her a threat regardless of your personal feelings. Elena's blood turned to ice. Evidence? Vincent had found something concrete. What kind of evidence? Marco asked. Enough to prove her documents are falsified. Enough to connect her to the Torino situation in Chicago. Vincent is presenting everything to the council tomorrow night. The council. Elena had heard whispers about it, a gathering of family leaders who made decisions about territory, business, and threats to the family. If Vincent was taking her case to the council, it meant he wanted official permission to eliminate her. There has to be another way, Marco said. There is, Don Roberto replied coldly. You eliminate the problem yourself, tonight, before Vincent can use this against you publicly. Elena's knees buckled. Marco's own father was ordering him to kill her. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making any sound. I won't do it, Marco said firmly. Then you're proving Vincent's point about your judgment being compromised. The council will vote to remove you as heir, and Vincent will become the next head of this family. Is that what you want? The conversation moved away down the hallway, but Elena had heard enough. She was trapped between impossible choices, Marco's position in the family or her life. And tomorrow night, Vincent would force the issue publicly. Elena waited until she was certain the hallway was empty before slipping out of Marco's room. She made her way to her small apartment above the garage, her mind racing. She had maybe 24 hours before the council meeting. 24 hours to figure out how to save both herself and Marco. As she packed her few belongings into a small suitcase, Elena tried to think rationally. Running was still not a real option. She had no resources and nowhere to go. Vincent would find her eventually, and when he did, it would be worse for both her and Marco. A soft knock on her door interrupted her frantic packing. Elena froze, wondering if Vincent had decided not to wait for the council's permission. The knock came again, gentler this time. "Elena, it's me," Marco's voice called softly. She opened the door to find him standing in the shadows, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Without the armor of his expensive suits and commanding presence, he looked younger, almost lost. "You heard," he said. Stepping inside and closing the door behind him, Elena nodded. Unable to speak around the lump in her throat, Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Elena could hear his heart beating rapidly beneath his shirt, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. "I won't let them hurt you," he whispered into her hair. "I promise." "You can't promise that," Elena said, pulling back to look at him. "Your father is right. If you protect me, Vincent wins. The family will choose him over you, and everything your father built will be destroyed." "Then we'll leave," Marco said desperately. "Tonight. We'll disappear together." Elena felt her heart break at the hope in his voice. "And go where? You think Vincent won't follow? You think the Torinos won't eventually find us? We'd be running forever, always looking over our shoulders." "Then what do you suggest?" Marco asked, his voice raw with emotion. Elena had been thinking about this during her frantic packing, and she had come to a terrible conclusion. There was only one way to end this that didn't destroy Marco or the family. "I give Vincent what he wants," she said quietly. "No," Marco's voice was sharp. "Final, listen to me," Elena insisted, taking his face in her hands. "Vincent doesn't really want me dead. He wants to prove that your judgment is compromised, that you're not fit to lead the family. If I confess everything publicly at the council meeting, admit that I lied about my identity, that I've been hiding from the Torinos, it takes away his ammunition. And then what? You think the council will just let you walk away?" Elena swallowed hard. "I think they'll give me a choice. Work for the family officially, with full knowledge of who I really am, or disappear permanently." The implication hung between them. In the Rossetti family, disappearing permanently rarely meant relocating to Florida. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me," Marco said fiercely. "It's not just for you," Elena replied. "It's for the family, for the people who depend on you. You'll be a good leader, Marco, better than Vincent could ever be. I won't be the reason that doesn't happen." Marco was quiet for a long time, holding her close. Elena could feel him thinking, weighing options, calculating odds the way he had been trained to do since childhood. "There might be another way," he said finally. "What do you mean?" Marco pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes intense with a new idea. "Vincent is using your past against us. But what if we used it for us instead?" Elena frowned, not understanding. "You have inside knowledge about the Torino family operation? You saw their books, their methods, their contacts? That information could be invaluable to us." "Marco, I don't think about it," he continued, his excitement growing. "Instead of being a liability, you become an asset. The council won't vote to eliminate someone who can give us a strategic advantage over our enemies." Elena felt a flicker of hope, then immediately squashed it. "The information I have is 2 years old. It's probably useless now. Maybe, or maybe it's exactly what we need to finally push the Torinos out of our territory good." Elena could see the plan forming in Marco's mind, could see him thinking several moves ahead the way chess players did. It was brilliant, really turning Vincent's weapon against him by making Elena too valuable to eliminate, but it was also incredibly risky. If her information wasn't useful, if the council decided she was still more of a threat than an asset, there would be no second chances. "If we do this," Elena said slowly, "and it doesn't work, then we face the consequences together," Marco finished. "But if it does work, you'll be under the family's protection officially. Vincent won't be able to touch you." Elena studied his face, seeing the determination there along with something else, love. Marco Rossetti, the future head of one of the most powerful crime families in the country, was in love with her. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "All right," she said finally. "Let's see if we can turn Vincent's trap into our weapon." Marco kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of promises neither of them might be able to keep. Tomorrow night at the council meeting, They would either save each other or destroy everything they cared about. Elena just hoped they were making the right choice. The council meeting was held in the mansion's formal dining room, but Elena had never seen it configured like this before. The long mahogany table that usually hosted elegant dinner parties now served as a tribunal. 8 chairs were arranged around it, each occupied by a member of the Rossetti family hierarchy. Don Roberto sat at the head, his weathered face impassive. Vincent sat to his right, radiating confidence and barely contained excitement. Marco had positioned himself across from Vincent, and Elena could see the tension in his shoulders despite his calm exterior. The other council members, uncles, cousins, and longtime family advisors, watched the proceedings with the detached interest of men who had seen many such trials before. Elena stood at the far end of the room, flanked by 2 guards. She was no longer the invisible maid who could slip through shadows unnoticed. Tonight she was the center of attention, and every eye in the room was fixed on her with varying degrees of suspicion, curiosity, and calculation. "We're here tonight because serious questions have been raised about one of our employees," Don Roberto began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. "Vincent, present your evidence." Vincent stood, pulling out a thick folder with the theatrical flair of a man who loved being the center of attention. "Thank you, Uncle. Over the past weeks, I've conducted a thorough investigation into our newest staff member, and what I've discovered is deeply troubling." He opened the folder and began pulling out documents. "Elena Martinez, as she calls herself now, is actually Elena Santos of Chicago. Her employment documents are forgeries, excellent forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless." Vincent placed the first set of papers on the table where all the council members could see them. Elena felt her heart sink as she recognized her original identification documents alongside the falsified ones Marco had helped her obtain. "Furthermore," Vincent continued, "Elena Santos was a witness in a federal case against the Torino family. She disappeared before the trial, and there's currently an active search for her by both federal authorities and Torino enforcers." Murmurs rippled around the table. Elena could see some of the council members exchanging worried glances. A witness in federal protection working in their house was exactly the kind of security breach that could bring down everything. "This woman has been given access to our private family areas," Vincent said, his voice rising with dramatic emphasis. "She's been cleaning Marco's personal quarters, his office, his study. She's seen documents, overheard conversations, learned details about our operations. And all this time, she's been living under a false identity while being hunted by our enemies." Don Roberto's expression remained neutral, but Elena could see him processing the implications. "These are serious allegations, Vincent. What do you propose we do?" "The security breach must be eliminated," Vincent said simply. "Permanently. And we need to examine how this woman was able to infiltrate our household so easily. I believe Marco's judgment has been compromised." All eyes turned to Marco, who had remained perfectly still throughout Vincent's presentation. Elena could see the pulse beating rapidly in his neck, the only sign of his inner turmoil. "Do you have anything to say in response to these accusations, Marco?" Don Roberto asked. Marco stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "I do, Father. But first, I think Elena should be allowed to speak for herself." Vincent's confidence faltered slightly. This wasn't part of his script. "Uncle, surely we don't need to hear from—" "Actually," Don Roberto interrupted, his calculating gaze fixed on Elena, "I'm curious to hear what she has to say." Elena Santos stepped forward. Elena moved to the center of the room, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. But as she looked around the table, she saw something unexpected in some of the faces, not just judgment but genuine curiosity. These were businessmen, after all, and they understood the value of information. "Is Vincent's account accurate?" Don Roberto asked. "Yes, sir," Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Everything he said about my identity and my past is true. I did witness the Torino money laundering operation. I was supposed to testify against them. And I did use false documents to get this job." Vincent smiled triumphantly, but Elena wasn't finished. But there are details Vincent didn't mention, she continued. Details that I think you'll find very interesting. Don Roberto leaned forward slightly. Such as? Elena took a deep breath, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. I wasn't just a casual witness to the Torino operation. I was their bookkeeper for 3 years. I handled their accounts, managed their money transfers, coordinated with their contacts. I know everything about how they operate. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Elena could see the council members sitting up straighter, their business instincts engaged. I know their suppliers, their distribution networks, their financial structure, Elena continued. I know which police officers they pay, which judges they've bought, which prosecutors they've compromised. I know the real names behind all their shell companies and the locations of their safe houses. Vincent's face had gone pale. This is obviously a desperate attempt to. I know about the warehouse on Pier 47. Elena said quietly, and Vincent's mouth snapped shut. The one where they store merchandise before shipping it to your territory. The one they think you don't know about. Don Roberto's eyes sharpened with interest. The Torinos had been making increasing incursions into Rossetti territory, and intelligence about their operations was worth its weight in gold. I also know about their plans for expansion, Elena added. Plans that directly threaten your family's interests. Why should we believe anything you say? One of the older council members asked. You've already proven you're willing to lie. Elena turned to face him directly. Because I have proof. She reached into her jacket slowly, mindful of the guards, and pulled out a small flash drive. I copied their financial records before I left Chicago. Everything is on here. Account numbers, transaction records, contact information, business plans. 2 years' worth of data. The room fell completely silent. Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she placed the drive on the table. Why didn't you turn this over to federal authorities? Don Roberto asked. Because I knew they'd bury it in bureaucracy while the Torinos continued to operate, Elena said. I wanted it to go to someone who could actually use it to stop them. Marco spoke for the first time since Elena had begun talking. She's proposing an alliance, Father. Her information in exchange for family protection. Vincent finally found his voice. This is insane. We can't trust her. How do we know this isn't all an elaborate setup by the Torinos themselves? Because, Elena said, looking directly at Vincent, if I were working for the Torinos, why would I give you information that could destroy them? Don Roberto picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his weathered hands. This information, how current is it? The financial structures don't change much, Elena replied. The key players, the methods, the corruption networks, those are all still relevant. And I can tell you exactly how they'll try to retaliate once you move against them. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as council members leaned together to discuss this unexpected development. Elena could see Vincent frantically trying to regain control of the situation, but the momentum had shifted. Finally, Don Roberto called for silence. This is an unusual situation, he said. Elena Santos, you've admitted to deceiving us about your identity. Under normal circumstances, that would be enough to warrant severe consequences. Elena's heart sank, but Don Roberto continued. However, the information you're offering could give us a significant advantage over a long-standing enemy. The council needs time to examine your claims and verify the contents of this drive. He looked directly at Elena, his dark eyes, so much like Marco's, studying her with the intensity of a man who had spent decades evaluating threats and opportunities. You'll remain under house arrest while we investigate. If your information proves valuable and accurate, we'll discuss terms for your continued ... employment. If it proves false or misleading, well ... he didn't need to finish the sentence? Vincent, Don Roberto continued, you've raised valid concerns about security protocols. We'll be reviewing our hiring procedures to ensure this situation doesn't happen again. Vincent's face was flushed with anger and frustration. His attempted coup had backfired spectacularly, and Elena could see him calculating his next move. Father, Marco said carefully, I request permission to oversee Elena's security during the investigation period. Don Roberto's eyebrows rose slightly. That would hardly be appropriate, given the circumstances. With respect, I'm the one most familiar with her work here. I'm the best qualified to ensure she doesn't attempt to flee or communicate with outside parties. Elena realized what Marco was doing, using the very suspicions about their relationship to justify keeping her close and protected. Don Roberto considered this for a long moment. Very well. But understand, Marco, your reputation is now tied to hers. If she betrays us, it reflects on your judgment as my heir. I understand, Father. As the council members began to disperse, Elena caught Vincent's eye across the room. The hatred and calculation she saw there made her blood run cold. Vang. Int might have lost this battle, but the war was far from over. Elena had bought herself time, but she knew the real test was just beginning. If her information didn't prove as valuable as she'd claimed, if the Torino data was outdated or incomplete, she would pay with her life. And Marco would pay with his position in the family. Everything now depended on whether a scared bookkeeper's insurance policy would be enough to topple one of the most dangerous crime families in the country. 3 weeks after the council meeting, Elena found herself in a position she never could have imagined. Instead of cleaning Marco's study, she was sitting across from his desk as an equal, helping him plan the most ambitious operation the Rossetti family had attempted in years. The flash drive had proven to be a goldmine of information. Elena's meticulous records had revealed not just the Torino family's current operations, but weaknesses in their structure that could be exploited. The financial data showed exactly how much money flowed through which accounts, making it possible to target their most profitable ventures. The shipment arrives at Pier 47 tomorrow night at 11, Elena said, pointing to the detailed schedule she had reconstructed from her old files. It's their biggest cocaine delivery this quarter, street value of about $12 million. Marco studied the information, his expression focused and calculating. Over the past weeks, Elena had watched him transform from the protective man who had held her in her tiny apartment to the ruthless, future crime boss who could plan someone's destruction with clinical precision. Security? Marco asked. Usually 4 guards at the warehouse, 2 patrol cars, and a lookout on the adjacent building. But Antonio Torino, Vincent's brother, will be there personally to oversee this delivery. He never trusts the really big shipments to subordinates. Marco's eyes sharpened with interest. Taking down Antonio Torino would be a major blow to their rivals, both strategically and symbolically. What about police response time? Elena consulted her notes. 14 minutes average, but they have 3 patrol officers on their payroll who work that district. They'll be delayed. A knock on the study door interrupted their planning. Marco called for entrance, and Tony, his most trusted enforcer, stepped inside. "Boss, we've got a problem," Tony said, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of stress. "Vincent's been making calls, reaching out to some of the old guard families, spreading stories about your relationship with Elena." Elena felt her stomach drop. They had been so focused on the Torino operation that they hadn't been watching for Vincent's countermove. "What kind of stories?" Marco asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Tony glanced uncomfortably at Elena before answering. "He's saying you've gone soft, that you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. Some of the families are starting to question whether you're ready to lead when Don Roberto steps down." Marco stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of everything he was carrying. "The Philadelphia family has called for a meeting," Tony continued. "They want to discuss succession concerns before they commit to any new territorial agreements." Elena realized with growing horror that her presence was still undermining Marco's position, even after she had proven her value to the family. Vincent was using their relationship as a weapon against Marco's leadership, and it was working. "Maybe I should leave," Elena said quietly. "Disappear for a while until things settle down." "No," Marco said immediately, turning back to face her. "Running away won't solve anything." Vincent will just use your absence as proof that I can't handle difficult situations. Then what do you suggest? Elena asked. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. Finally, he turned to Tony. Set up the meeting with Philadelphia and invite Vincent to attend as my advisor. Tony looked confused. Boss? Vincent wants to position himself as the voice of reason? Fine, let him explain to the Philadelphia family why he thinks it's a mistake to use every available asset against our enemies. Elena began to understand Marco's strategy. Instead of hiding their relationship or apologizing for it, he was going to force Vincent to publicly argue against intelligence gathering and strategic alliances. The Torino operation, Elena said. You're going to present it as a family initiative. Marco smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. Exactly. Vincent can either support the operation and admit that you're valuable, or he can oppose it and look like he's protecting our enemies. Tony grinned. That's brilliant, boss. But Elena wasn't convinced. What if Vincent finds a third option? What if he tries to sabotage the operation? The smile faded from Marco's face. That would be treason. Even Vincent wouldn't cross that line. Elena wasn't so sure. Vincent had already shown he was willing to risk family security to advance his own position. But she kept her doubts to herself. The meeting with the Philadelphia family took place 2 nights. Later, in a private dining room at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Elena watched from the security monitors in Marco's car as the various family representatives arrived. These were powerful, dangerous men who controlled territories across 3 states. Vincent had arrived early, and was already working the room when Marco entered. Elena could see him gesturing emphatically, his expression earnest and concerned. Whatever he was saying, he had their attention. Marco took his place at the head of the table with the confidence of a man born to lead. But Elena could see the tension in his posture, the way his jaw tightened as he listened to the conversations around him. Gentlemen, Marco began, I've called this meeting to discuss a significant opportunity that's presented itself. We have the chance to deal a decisive blow to the Torino family's operations in our city. He outlined the plan with military precision, detailing the intelligence they had gathered and the strategic value of the upcoming raid on Pier 47. Elena watched the faces of the Philadelphia representatives as they realized the scope and sophistication of the operation. This is impressive work. Marco, the senior Philadelphia representative said, where did this intelligence come from? Vincent leaned forward and Elena held her breath. This was the moment of truth. The information comes from a former Torino employee who's now under family protection, Marco said smoothly. Someone with intimate knowledge of their operations who's chosen to work with us instead of against us. A defector? Another representative asked. Vincent finally spoke up. A compromised witness who's being hunted by federal authorities. Someone whose presence puts all our families at risk. The room fell silent. Elena could see Marco's hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. Vincent raises interesting points about risk, Marco said calmly. But I'm curious about his solution. Should we ignore intelligence that could eliminate a major threat to our territory? Should we let the Torinos continue their expansion because we're afraid of taking calculated risks? I'm suggesting we be cautious about trusting people with questionable loyalties, Vincent replied. Questionable loyalties, Marco repeated. Like someone who would argue against using every advantage to protect family interests? The implication hung in the air like a loaded gun. Vincent had walked directly into Marco's trap. The Philadelphia representative studied both men carefully. Marco, if this operation is successful, it would certainly demonstrate strong leadership. Vincent, your concerns about security are valid, but this intelligence seems too valuable to ignore. Elena watched Vincent's face as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. He had been forced to choose between supporting Marco's operation and appearing weak, or opposing it and looking like he was protecting the family's enemies. Of course, Vincent said finally. I support any action that strengthens our position. I simply wanted to ensure all risks were considered. Marco's smile was polite and utterly ruthless. I appreciate your thorough analysis, Vincent. Your concerns will certainly be taken into account during the operation. The meeting concluded with the Philadelphia family's endorsement of the Torino raid. As the representatives filed out, Elena could see Vincent lingering behind, his expression dark with rage and calculation. Later, back at the mansion, Marco found Elena in his study. She was standing by the window, looking out at the garden where she had once tried so hard to remain invisible. "You did it," she said, without turning around. "Vincent can't oppose the operation now without looking like a traitor." "We did it," Marco corrected, moving to stand behind her. "Your information, your courage in facing the council, none of this would have been possible without you." Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him behind her. "What happens after tomorrow night? After we take down the Torino shipment?" "After tomorrow night, you won't be the invisible maid anymore," Marco said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You'll be Elena Santos, strategic consultant to the Rossetti family? Vincent won't be able to touch you. And us?" Elena asked quietly. Marco turned her in his arms, tilting her chin up so she was looking directly into his eyes. "Us? We're going to be spectacular. The invisible maid who captured the heart of the Mafia boss. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale." Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Fairy tales don't usually involve crime families and federal witnesses." "Then,"